For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4581, the Screening and Vetting Passenger Exchange Act of 2017.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4581, a bill to require the Secretary of Homeland Security to develop best practices for utilizing advanced passenger information and passenger name record data for counterterrorism screening and vetting operations and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to voice my full support for H.R. 4581, the Screening and Vetting Passenger Exchange Act of 2017. This legislation directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to develop best practices for utilizing advanced passenger information, or API, and passenger names record data, or PNR, for counterterrorism screening and vetting operations. It also enables the Secretary to share those practices with our allies, including countries participating in the Visa Waiver Program, and to provide assistance in implementing these practices in those countries. Having access to API, which is biographic information, and PNR data, which is data about reservation and itinerary information, allows our Homeland Security professionals to confirm the identities and travel patterns of potential criminals and terrorists before they enter the United States, allowing our men and women on the front lines to fight against terrorism to work with Visa Waiver Programs countries to make sure that they rise to the same standards only increases the safety of our nation, the safety of all Americans traveling abroad, and the safety of all people across the globe. This legislation is a step in the right direction towards addressing further potential emerging threats. I strongly urge my colleagues to support our nation's Homeland Security by supporting my bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4581, the Screening and Vetting Passenger Exchange Act of 2017, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Screening and Vetting Passenger Act of 2017 requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to develop and share best practices for using data provided by passengers in screening and vetting operations with our allies around the world. Since 2014, more than 75 million international travelers have come to the United States. In recent years, especially during the Obama administration, great strides were made to use the information furnished by these incoming travelers to advance security and vetting processes. Building upon the Department's 2017 last point of departure security enhancements that sought to raise the bar in physical screenings at overseas airports with direct flights to the U.S., this bill will further reinforce security measures and seek to provide our overseas partners with the capabilities to advance their own vetting and screening. No country is immune from terrorism, and this bill will ensure that DHS can be a valued partner to nations that work with us. By providing best practices, our passenger screening, H.R. 41, seeks to assure that terrorists seeking to inflict harm are not allowed to travel without detection. I urge my House colleagues to support this measure and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honor to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas and the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Mr. McCall.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the Screening and Vetting Passenger Act. I want to thank Congressman Fitzpatrick for bringing this important legislation. The United States is currently experiencing one of the highest terror threat environments since 9/11. Despite crushing the caliphate in Iraq and Syria, ISIS continues to demonstrate its capability to inspire attacks on the West, including in the homeland. The 2 terror attacks in New York City late last year are stark reminders of this reality and the threat facing the United States. Given the nature of this evolving threat, I established a task force on denying terrorist entry into the United States last year and appointed Representative Mike Gallagher to head up the effort. I'd like to thank all the members of the task force for their hard work in making this effort a success. I charged this task force with examining how terrorists might infiltrate the homeland, identifying challenges with the current U.S. government information sharing and vetting procedures, and reviewing the screening agency's structure and bureaucracy. After completing its review, the task force issued a report outlining its findings and providing 7 recommendations designed to address the identified gaps. These recommendations were the basis for several of the bills we are considering today. As evidenced by the recent spate of attacks, there is a large population of radicalized individuals in Europe who are willing to commit violence in the name of terrorist groups like ISIS. We must remain vigilant and cannot forget many of these individuals that they are just one flight away from the United States. Given the seriousness of this threat, we must do more at home and abroad to screen and vet people seeking to enter the United States. The bills we are considering today will enhance our capabilities by improving information sharing and promoting efficiencies in the screening and vetting process, helping ensure the homeland is the best secured against terrorist infiltration. And therefore, I urge my colleagues to support this bill. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers, and I'm prepared to close once the gentleman does.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to make international travel more secure and a stronger relationship between our country and our allies. All nations must increase their vigilance with respect to security screening. There's thousands of ISIL foot soldiers that may seek to enter the Western world and other nations to carry out their attacks. This legislation seeks to harness the United States' best practices and capabilities to advance the safety of the global aviation community as we face an agile and evolving enemy. I encourage my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I urge all my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4581? Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania asks for the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question